The human body's biological system plays a big part in influencing our behaviors and mental processes. When looking at the biological system, it can seem very complex and overwhelming, but it truly isn't that bad.
To begin, we'll have to start with neurocommunication. One of the most important parts of neurocommunication is the neuron. Neurons are the fundamental building blocks of the nervous system. It uses both chemical and electrical signals to communicate. There are six main parts that make up a neuron: the soma, or cell body, the dendrites, the axon, the myelin sheath, the Schwann cell, and the nodes around VA. To start communication with a neuron, the incoming messages, or neurotransmitters, first interact with the dendrites. Dendrites are the branch like structures of the neuron. They are the ones that pass the message to the soma, or cell body. The soma is the largest portion of the neuron that contains the nucleus and the organelles. Once the message is transferred to the soma, it travels down the axon. The axon is the conduit that communicates the signal down the neuron and away from the cell body. On it, there are Schwann cells. These cells form a chain and amplify the nervous signal. Schwann cells are coated in a lipid fat-based insulation called the myelin sheath. This insulation stops the leaking of the electrical signals and are formed by the glial cells. Diseases like multiple sclerosis, or MS, are caused by a deterioration in the myelin sheath, which results in a loss of control over muscle movement. Last but not least are the nodes around VA. These are gaps between the Schwann cells.
When talking about neural communication, it is important to note that neurons don't just fire from anything. Certain requirements must be met, or else it will stay dormant. Every neuron has a charge that is associated with them. This is due to the concentration of different ions being transported into and out of the cell. When a cell is at rest, it has a resting membrane potential of negative 70 millivolts. In this state, both of the sodium and potassium channels are closed. To fire a neuron, depolarization happens first. Depolarization is the reduction in the absolute value of the membrane potential due to sodium channels being open while the potassium channels stay closed. In other words, when the sodium channel opens, a rush of sodium ions come rushing in. These sodium ions have a positive charge. This brings up the resting membrane potential of negative 70 millivolts and makes the cell less negative on the inside when compared to its outside. If depolarization reaches a certain threshold, it will cause the nerve to fire. This is action potential. This is also an example of the all or none response, as a cell must reach the threshold in order to have the nerve fire. It doesn't matter how close the cell is to the threshold, as if it is still under, it will not activate the nerve. The conduction of the action potential is shot down the axon, as the myelin sheath helps to increase its velocity. As the chemical signal travels down the axon, it goes from one node of Ranvier to the next. This is known as saltatory conduction. Saltatory conduction is the spread of the chemical signal down the neuron from one node to the next. When the nerve is done firing, it goes into repolarization, otherwise known as hyperpolarization. This is when the membrane potential of the nerve is lowered due to potassium channels being opened. The sodium channels close in return, and the inside of the cell goes from positive back to its negative state.
Now that we have looked at how an individual nerve works, let's look at how it communicates with others. There are four important structures that help with this. The first is the synapse. This is a gap between nerve cells, or a nerve cell and a muscle cell. The second is the synaptic vesicle. The synaptic vesicle is a small, sac-like membrane-bound organelle that holds neurotransmitters at the presynaptic membrane. It is located in the axon terminals and will release neurotransmitters into the synapse when the nerve activates. The third is the presynaptic membrane. This is the surface of the synaptic terminal that faces the synaptic cleft, the space between neurons. The presynaptic membrane releases the packaged neurotransmitters across the cleft to the postsynaptic cell. Lastly is the postsynaptic membrane. This is the surface of the cell body that is on the opposite side of the synapse. It is what receives the neurotransmitters and start depolarization of the neuron. An easy way to remember the difference between presynaptic membrane and the postsynaptic membrane is to look at their prefixes. The prefix pre means before, while the prefix post means after. The presynaptic membrane is the membrane that is first. It is the one that sends out the message. The postsynaptic membrane comes after and is the one that receives the message.
You've probably been hearing the word neurotransmitters being brought up a lot, but what exactly are they? Neurotransmitters are chemical messengers made by neurons. Like stated previously, they are what is released at synaptic vesicles. The human body contains hundreds of neurotransmitters that have many different effects. This can be seen with how neurotransmitters affect a person's eating habits and body weight. When you feel hungry, this is due to low levels of norepinephrine, dopamine, serotonin, leptin, and many others. When you eat, this raises the levels of these neurotransmitters, thus making you feel full. In this video, we'll only go over 6 of them and the diseases associated with each. One of the best known neurotransmitters are endorphins, otherwise known as natural painkillers. They reduce the feeling of pain and can reduce feelings of pleasure. This can be seen when you injure yourself. When you receive an injury, like a sprained ankle, your body will release endorphins to make the pain more bearable. Endorphins are also the cause of something called runner's high. This is when a person experiences a boosted mood. The disease associated with this neurotransmitter is opiate addiction. People with this addiction are addicted to painkillers. Next is dopamine. Dopamine helps regulate movement and thought processes. Deficiencies of dopamine levels are often closely linked to Parkinson's disease. People with schizophrenia have been often found with more receptor sites for dopamine. Serotonin is a neurotransmitter that regulates a person's emotional state and sleep. Low levels of serotonin are closely tied to depression, anxiety, and OCD. Norepinephrine causes physical arousal and helps people with things like learning and memory. It is also the neurotransmitter that is related to high blood pressure and anxiety. Excess and deficiencies in norepinephrine levels are linked to mood disorders. Acetylcholine also affects learning and memory, but has the addition of regulating muscle contractions. Irregularities in a person's acetylcholine levels can also be accompanied by muscular disorders. Low acetylcholine is associated with Alzheimer's disease.
Gamma aminobutyric acid, or GABA, plays a role in inhibiting brain activity. GABA can help in calming anxiety reactions as well. Deficiencies in GABA are not only linked to anxiety, but depression as well. There are certain drugs that affect the nervous system. These drugs are known as psychoactive drugs and can be broken down to 2 categories: agonists and antagonists. Psychoactive drugs are drugs that have either inhibitory or excitatory effects on the nervous system. They range from something like caffeine to LSD. These type of drugs often have side effects as it may work on different neural pathways. This can be seen with how Prozac, a drug that treats depression by mimicking serotonin, can affect a person's sleep and eating patterns. Agonists are drugs that mimic the effect of a certain neurotransmitter. An example would be things like tranquilizers and alcohol. These 2 items mimic GABA by inhibiting brain activity. Prozac is another one that would be considered an agonist. As said before, it mimics serotonin. Antagonists are drugs that inhibit the effect of neurotransmitters. An example is the drug haloperidol, which is an antagonist for dopamine as it blocks the dopamine receptors.
Now let's move on to the nervous system, which has two parts: the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. The central nervous system is made up of the brain and spinal cord. It is considered to be the command center of the body. The spinal cord is what deals with reflexes. An injury to it can cause paralysis. Generally, the higher the injury is located on the spinal cord, the more severe the damage is. The brain is what deals with voluntary movements. Reflexes are quick, unalert responses to a stimulus. Things like pulling your hand away from a hot surface is a reflex. One reflex that many people know is the knee jerk reflex. This is when doctors tap just above a person's knee, which causes them to kick outwards.
The peripheral nervous system is made up of a series of nerves that connect the central nervous system to the rest of the body. It carries incoming signals to the brain and outgoing signals to the muscles. An example would be turning off the lights in a room. Your PNS will use visual cues like the lights being on to send the brain a message. The brain will then assess what it sees and move your body to press the light switch. The PNS has two main divisions, the somatic and the autonomic. The somatic division is what allows communication with the outside world. It takes information gathered from the surrounding and sends it to the CNS and the muscles. This can best be seen with how the smell of food arouses the muscles in the body to eat. The autonomic division regulates digestion, respiration, sleep, and other vital functions. It is best known for the fight or flight response. This response is carried out by the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system is the one responsible for mobilizing the body's energy in times of stress. When activated, it increases the respiratory and heart rates and causes dilation of the pupils. Once a person has removed themselves from the source of stress, the parasympathetic nervous system helps to bring the body back down to homeostasis. You can see these two nervous systems in action when a person encounters something scary or stressful. Say a person was just hiking and a mountain lion suddenly jumped out in front of them. This clear object of danger will cause the sympathetic nervous system to kick in. With it, they will begin to take deeper breaths and feel the heartbeat increase as their body is preparing to either fight the animal or flee from it. Hopefully, they don't choose to fight the mountain lion, but rather flee from it to a safe spot. Once in a safe location, the parasympathetic nervous system will activate with the sympathetic nervous system shutting off. This will bring their bodily functions, like the heart rate, back down to normal.
Another important system of the human body is the endocrine system. This is a system made up of hormones that carries messages using different glands. What connects the endocrine system to the nervous system is the hypothalamus. It is a structure of the brain located in the lower half that takes signals from the nervous system and propagates the endocrine response. It also controls the pituitary gland, otherwise known as the master gland, as it regulates the activity of many different glands, like the thyroid and the ovaries. The pituitary gland can release hormones like oxytocin that leads to things like uterus contractions and breast milk letdown. Release of the prolactin hormone stimulates milk production from the mammary gland. The antidiuretic hormone regulates water retention in the kidneys. Growth hormone, of course, stimulates growth. Follicle stimulating hormones stimulate the production of ova and sperm. The thyroid gland is located near the trachea. It is a gland that releases calcitonin, which lowers calcium levels in the bloodstream and stimulates bone structure. It also releases triiodothyronine and thyroxine, which stimulates metabolism. This is countered by the parathyroid gland, which is located on the surface of the thyroid gland. The parathyroid hormone raises blood calcium. The pancreas is a structure that is located near the kidneys and contains specialized cells known as islets of Langerhans. The two most important hormones the pancreas secretes are insulin and glucagon. Insulin is what lowers blood glucose levels, while glucagon is what raises blood glucose levels. The adrenal glands are located on top of the kidneys and help with the flight or fight response, as it increases things like heart rate and blood pressure while slowing down the digestive system. The hormones secreted are norepinephrine and epinephrine. Gonads include the testes and ovaries. Testes are male sex glands and produce androgens that form male characteristics. Ovaries are female sex glands that produce hormones like estrogen for female characteristics and proestrogen that helps with maintaining pregnancy. The pineal gland is a small peanut-shaped gland that is located near the center of the brain. It produces melatonin, which helps maintain a person's sleep cycle and other circadian rhythms.
The thymus is something located in the upper portion of the chest. It is something that is crucial to the body's immune system. The brain plays a big role in helping the human body function. When studying the brain, psychologists use many different tools to aid their research. The electroencephalogram, otherwise known as EEG, is a device that records the pattern of electrical activity found in the brain. It reveals what areas of the brain are most active when performing tasks or being in a certain mental state. EEGs are also able to trace abnormal brain waves that are caused by things like epilepsy and other brain malfunctions. Unlike the others, EEGs do not provide a picture of the brain and are mostly used in sleep research. Positron emission tomography or PET scans are computer generated images of the brain. When using this device, researchers inject a harmless radioactive form of glucose into the bloodstream. The image produced is color coded and provides info about glucose metabolism. PET scans are often used to identify brain areas that are active during ordinary activities. A computerized tomography scan, or a CT scan, uses X rays to create a static picture of the brain. This is a widely used tool in research as it is the least expensive type of imaging. CT scans are able to reveal what effects strokes, tumors, and other brain disorders have on a person. Magnetic resonance imaging, or MRIs, uses a high frequency magnetic field to produce a highly detailed picture of the brain. MRIs help to map brain structures and identify abnormalities.
The brain can be broken down into three main regions: the hindbrain, the midbrain, and the forebrain. Each section contains many different parts. Let's start with the hindbrain. The hindbrain is the base of the brain that includes the medulla, the pons, and cerebellum. It is the oldest part of the brain to develop and control automatic behaviors like respiration and heartbeat. The medulla controls vital functions like breathing, circulation, and swallowing. Pons, which are located above the medulla, are responsible for sleeping, walking, and dreaming. The word pons is Latin for bridge, which can be seen with how pons have axons that cross from one side of the brain to the other. The cerebellum is a two-sided structure that is located at the back of the brain. This large structure is responsible for fine muscle movement and maintaining posture.
Now let's move on to the midbrain. The midbrain is the small area in the brain that is located just above the spinal cord and below the forebrain. It is the part of the brain that integrates auditory and visual sensory information along with muscle movement. Running through the center of the midbrain is a network of nerve fibers. This is known as reticular formation. The reticular formation helps to regulate attention, arousal, and sleep. If a person was to damage their reticular formation, then they may fall into a coma.
Last but not least is the forebrain. This section of the brain is the largest and most complex out of the three. It contains control centers for complex behaviors and mental processes. In the forebrain, we have the thalamus. The thalamus is located at the top of the brainstem and is the structure that receives input from all senses except for smell. It acts like a relay station as it directs information gathered from the senses to the appropriate cortical areas. If the thalamus were to be injured, it could lead to blindness and deafness. The hypothalamus is something that has been mentioned previously when talking about the endocrine system. It is a structure located under the thalamus and is often called the brain's master control center. It regulates key body functions like hunger and thirst. Any damage to it can either cause an increase in eating or an increase in the feeling of being full. The hippocampus plays a major role in forming new memories of events and information. Thus, any damage will result in difficulties encoding new events but not retrieving old ones. The amygdala is linked to emotions as it seems to be the structure that produces and regulates things like fear and anger. The hippocampus, the amygdala, and the hypothalamus are all parts of the limbic system and play a key role in experiencing emotions.
There is another structure of the brain that is located on top of the forebrain. This thin outer covering is the cerebral cortex. The cerebral cortex is a structure that is composed of approximately 30 billion densely packed neurons. It has 9 times as many supporting glial cells. The gray color it has often leads it being described as being made of gray matter. The wrinkles on the cerebral cortex helped increase the brain's surface area. If the wrinkles were to be smoothed out, then the cerebral cortex will be the size of a newspaper.
When looking at the cerebral cortex, it can be divided into two hemispheres. Each hemisphere also has their own specialized functions and controls the opposite side of the body. The left hemisphere is specialized in verbal and analytical functions. This is the side of the brain that helps you with things like reading, writing, and math, as it is where memory for words and numbers are. Without this hemisphere, you wouldn't be able to understand speech or writing. It is also the part that is in charge of movement of the body, most importantly, movement of your mouth for speaking. Positive emotions seem to originate from this side of the cerebral cortex. The right hemisphere specializes in nonverbal abilities, like visual tasks and music. This side of the cerebral cortex is where memories for shapes and music are stored. It also helps the body to understand spatial relationships and image and helps the body to respond to commands. While the left hemisphere takes care of the positive emotions, the right hemisphere seems to be the one that takes care of the negative emotions. Connecting these two hemispheres is a corpus callosum. This bundle of nerve fibers acts like a bridge between the left and right and allows them to communicate with each other. In certain cases where patients are suffering from severe seizures, neurosurgeons will cut the corpus callosum in order to try to contain the spread. This is known as split brain surgery.
There are 4 distinct lobes in each hemisphere. Some of these lobes have overlapping functions, but each do perform their own separate tasks. The frontal lobes are located directly behind the forehead. They are the ones responsible for abstract thought and emotional control. Damage to these lobes may cause people to lose the ability to make and carry out plans. The left frontal lobe has an area known as Broca's area. Broca's area is crucial in speech production. Damage to this area will make it difficult for an individual to move their muscles for speech, but it will not inhibit their ability to understand speech. The parietal lobes are located at the top of the brain, just behind the frontal lobes. This area receives and interprets bodily sensations like pressure, temperature, touch, and pain. The parietal lobes also helps you know the locations of your body parts. The temporal lobes are located above the ears near the temples. It is responsible for processing incoming information from the ears. The left temporal lobe has an area known as Wernicke's area. This plays a crucial role in language development. Damage to this area has the opposite effect to damage to the Broca's area. Individuals suffering from this area will be able to speak, but they will experience difficulties in comprehending what has been said. The occipital lobes are located in the back of the brain. Like the name suggests, it is responsible for vision and visual perception. If there is damage, then a person can experience blindness, even if their eyes are not damaged.